Hey everyone, this is Tracy Friedlander. You're listening to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. On the show today, I have author Carrie Knowles. Carrie is also an artist, mother of a classical musician, and a chamber music festival creator. I've wanted to have Carrie on for a while to talk about the value of storytelling for musicians. She has been a big inspiration to me because in her life, she goes out and gets what she wants. She tries things she hasn't done before, like most recently, turn one of her recently launched short stories into a play, and she takes these things on without care for the fact that she hasn't done them before. She's open to going for it and learning along the way. I've known Carrie since I moved to Raleigh, and we have had numerous valuable conversations that were not recorded. It's exciting that I've finally been able to record one of them for this podcast. It's true. When you can tell great stories, you have the opportunity to engage and enroll people in what you're up to. Storytelling unlocks a connection you can make with your followers and audience members, a key component in a musician's toolkit that is often unhoned, but is crucial to be cultivated. Today we sit down and dive into storytelling, the hierarchy of music careers and what it means to be a freelancer, what goes into building a chamber music festival from scratch, and so much more. Before we start, I'd like to thank Fix Music for sponsoring Crushing Classical Podcast. Fix Music is your online resource for high-quality sheet music at great prices. There are some new offerings at Fix available that you'll want to know about. Now there's organ music, a large choral music selection, as well as orchestra parts that you would need for concerts and auditions. And now they are actively working with choral and orchestra directors to help plan seasons. So if you're a program director and you want some help on choosing pieces for your next season, contact Fix Music today through their website. And as always, free shipping on all domestic orders. Check out fixmusic.com for your sheet music needs and use the link in the show notes to receive 10% off your first order. Let's get started. Carrie, I'm so glad you're here today because we've had so much great conversation already off the record and off the recording. So now we're going to start recording.
Well, I love being here. Thank you.
Thanks. So Carrie, you are so many things. You are an author, an artist, a parent to a musician, and you have so many great things to say about all of this stuff and advice. I want to start out with storytelling. Okay. Because you're a storyteller, you're an author, and I want to know, because you've told me many times how important storytelling is for all the things that musicians have to do outside of a musical story that you tell with your instrument. What good is storytelling for a musician?
I think in order to build your audience, which we've been talking about for the last hour, you have to be able to tell them why. And you can't just say, well, because you're going to have a good time. Mm-hmm. And if you tell a story, you engage somebody. You give them an opportunity to see themselves. And a really good story, is a moment where somebody gets to hear the story, read the story, think about the story, and wonder. What you want to have happen is that person needs to wonder at the end of it, what would I have done? Could I have done that? Am I interested in that? How would I have reacted to that incident? And so a story draws somebody in and engages them in a real personal level, then more than just saying, it's beautiful music, you're going to love it. Mm-hmm. My friend is playing a solo, and he's really good, or she's really terrific, and you've got to hear this woman sing. So what?
This is important for the world because XYZ.
Exactly.
Right.
Or to say, you really need to hear her sing because it's beautiful. And then I want to say, well, that doesn't mean anything. Okay, fine, but if I don't care about that. And a story puts somebody into the mindset to care about that. Right. And that's what you want, is you want that moment when somebody cares that they're there or not there. And I think a friend last night went to see Carole King's Beautiful and said, and I knew all the words to the song, and it was just wonderful. And so Carole King's music was a part of her life growing up. And so to hear it on stage and to be connected, she was already connected to that music, but then she connected to the life of Carole King through seeing that play. Wow, that's what you want. I mean, you really want that. And how do I connect with Beethoven? How do I connect with Bach other than that was beautiful music? The more I know the story, the more that music means to me. When our kids were growing up, there was that wonderful series of the life of musicians and composers, the life of Beethoven. And they were beautifully told. And I could see when our children would listen to those tapes, they were, on cassette tapes, the story of Beethoven's life, losing his hearing, his own sadnesses, what had gone well with him, what had gone badly with him. They walked away from those children's stories about Beethoven with an understanding that that was somebody who lived, who didn't have a perfect life, whose music was about some of the sadness, was about some of his loss, was about more than sitting in an orchestra and listening to those songs and okay, the song is over with what's next on the program. And so I loved those tapes, and I loved how our children responded to them, that Beethoven became part of them at that point. And it was part of their story. They knew that story. They knew that Beethoven. They knew who he was. And so they wanted to hear that. And they wanted to be part of that. I remember one time I had a whole car full of kids going to some, place where you drove fast little cars and paintball or whatever. I think it was somebody's birthday or something. And there were like 10 little boys in our minivan, and the radio was on, and a piece by, an orchestra was playing a piece by Beethoven, and Cole, our youngest son, who must have been 6 or 7 at the time, just, stopped, and the kids were chatting and going on and on and on. And Cole just stopped and sat there and listened intently. And when that song was over, before the announcer could say anything, Cole said, "Early Beethoven, nice." And I thought, yeah, he's right. That was, in fact, early Beethoven, wow. Nice. And, how rich of a life can you live other than that?
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I'm thinking about how people promote generally, especially, on one hand, you have people who know marketing and symphonies and stuff, and they still say, you got to hear this because it's going to be so great.
Right.
But then you have musicians who are trying to start their own thing. And I remember we were having coffee one day, and I said to you, Carrie, my concert with Contempo was so great. Like, way more people than I thought would show up. Uh-huh. And I was so happy. And you said, that's not a story, though.
Right.
And I'm like, you're right. It's not a story. What's the story? So I see it all the time, too. And it's in the mind of, I need to promote something. You think that you just have to say to people, you have to go to this.
Right.
It's like you forget what makes you yourself go to something.
Right. What's the motivating factor?
The motivating factor is whether or not you care, right? And a story can help you care about it.
Right. And I'm also struck, I think I do a number of workshops, and I work with a lot of different people. I don't do as much of that workshop work as I used to do, but I still do quite a bit of it. And I think that today, more than ever, the story is the core of what people want, what people need to feed themselves. I mean, this little iPhone machine is such a great thing, but we're hooked and we just keep on, it's like seeing somebody. My favorite thing on the internet these days is Nailed It, where somebody goes to Pinterest and there's like this beautiful birthday cake of a mountain scene, and it just looks so perfect and glorious, and then somebody tries it and the frosting is dripping off the sides and nailed it. I mean, it's so human, and that's why I love it. It's kind of like this moment of humanness. I use a communications team. I don't do all my own promoting anymore just because I like to write. I like to help other people more than I like to promote myself, which is so wonderful of you to help me promote myself today. And I did a video for an upcoming event about my book coming out, about Black Tie Optional coming out. And of course, there was not a lot of perfection. It just didn't flow out, and they had trouble with some of the equipment, and then I had to do it over and over again to enough where, the equipment was failing, and we had difficulty with the lighting, and the whole usual video thing. And so I had to get back in the framework to do this video, and it was a little hard to do it. And I did some little bloopery things, and then Claremont Communications called me up and said, "Can we run your bloopers?" And I said, "Sure, run the bloopers." Well, the bloopers have gotten more attention than the video has gotten. And so
I saw them actually on Instagram. They're funny.
They're funny.
Yeah.
And so many people have written me and said, "Oh, they're so human. They're so human." Boy, we're missing that. We're missing that so human piece of our lives, and we crave it. And so that's what the story fulfills. That so human piece.
Yeah, people are attracted to it regardless. They don't even know why, but they are.
Right. And because we live with machines and we live in a world full of chaos, that we just want a quiet moment of humanness. We want, to be able to sit and feel connected. And I think that there's so much disconnect, and it's
So
interesting.
much.
Yeah.
So much. So tell me about your book, but specifically I want to know about that story with the band director.
Right.
Yeah.
The title of the book is Black Tie Optional, and the story, Black Tie Optional, in the book is about a young man who is, for better or worse, on the spectrum. His name is Sonny, and he has a mother who's a single mother and who's struggling to make things work. And he is in early high school age, and his mother cannot take him to his concert that night, and asks a neighbor who is definitely single, has no idea, doesn't ever want to have children, and thinks Sonny is the most annoying human being who's ever lived. And Sonny just babbles on and on and on and on and on and on and on, much to her annoyance. And she winds up agreeing to take him to his concert. But she's just going to drive. She's going to drop him off. She's going to be done with it. And in the meantime, he's fiddling with this black silk tie that he can't tie. He doesn't have a father, and his mother didn't tell him how to tie it. And he needs to have his tie tied, and she doesn't know how to tie it. And so there becomes this conversation about how do you deal with this black silk tie, and she finds it very annoying. And he just talks about how wonderful it is to play the clarinet and to be sitting in the middle of the band or the orchestra that he's in, and to have the music be all around him, and for him to be a little part of that. And you can tell by the way he talks about it that that's the greatest, calmest joy of his life. And he gets into a thing with her in the car, and when they pull up to the school, he jumps out of the car and goes running into the school building, and he leaves his tie behind. And she realizes how important that is. And she takes it in to the school, not knowing how to find him or the band director, and to give him this tie. And the band director says to her, that's only for, black tie is optional for him, for Sonny. It's only the top band that gets to wear the black tie, that they have to wear the black tie. And at that moment, she changes, and she realizes that he needs that black tie, and that by God, he's going to get that black tie. And not only that, but this band director is going to tie it for him. And so it's a switch for her, and it's a recognition that this child, this person who has what anybody else would say, oh, this is a very limited kid. You know, he doesn't have a dad. He's clearly on the spectrum. He's flunked the English exam 3 times. He's going to be held back because he can't get it together to write it. He's supposed to be writing a book report on Animal Farm, and he doesn't get it. He thinks it's about the animals. He doesn't understand it's about politics. He's in a world that doesn't relate to him except for sitting in that music. And that's what's important. And so for me, it's like the title, you know, you get to wear the black tie because you play in an orchestra. Tracy, you know, David he gets to sit up front in his black tie. Mm-hmm. So he's got a really important position. But what about the 7th or 8th grader who's never going to sit in your position, who's never going to be that clarinetist up there, who's never going to be required to wear that black tie, who's never going to have that title? Why can't they have that music as well, have that experience that you have, can sit in the middle of the orchestra and be surrounded by that? I mean, I think that that's beautiful.
It is, and God, it hits on so many things. First of all, it hits on education.
Yes.
How people, in this fictional case, but how he was separating people and saying, you're over here, you're the good ones.
Right, and you're over here.
Yeah. And that happens throughout a
Yep.
classical musician's career.
Right.
You're over here because you're a freelancer, and these people are over here because they have a title.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, God, that's a whole other topic. First, I don't want to go there yet because I still want to talk a little bit more about this story about the educational thing. So I love how, first of all, that story, just you telling that story right now just brought me in so much to the point where I'm like, gonna cry for Sonny and cheer on the woman who's gonna go find him, and especially after she was like, I resonate with, I'm annoyed with this kid, I don't even want to deal, he's not even my kid, I'm just doing my neighbor a favor, you know what I mean? And suddenly something switches, like, no, this isn't how it should go down.
Right.
And I think a lot of people could, if they chose to, say, this isn't how this is gonna go down. In their educational situations,
right.
In, you know, any kind of situation, like in a freelancer situation where, you know, I mean, some crappy stuff happens out
sure.
there.
Absolutely.
You know? And when musicians can stand up for themselves and say, no, this isn't how it's going to go down. Even
right.
if you don't have a position, even though you're not, you know, you don't have a collective bargaining agreement because this is a freelance group, but the management is doing some crappy stuff, you should still say, no, this isn't how it's going to go down.
Right.
You know.
And more, you know, it costs an orchestra to have those fixed positions, those tutti positions, you know. It costs them to pay for the insurance. It costs them to do this. It costs them to do that. So orchestras are corporations. And so they're going to minimize some of their costs and say, okay, 70% of the orchestra now is going to be fixed positions and 30% are going to be freelancers. Because mm-hmm. sometimes we need a bigger orchestra and sometimes we can do it with a smaller orchestra. So let's figure that out. And all these guys over here, when we need big, we'll call in these freelancers. These freelancers that we don't pay the insurance on, mm-hmm. we don't pay the retirement on, we don't pay this on, we don't pay that on.
Yeah.
And, you know, you see that not only in music, but you see it in everything. You see it at NC State University, you know. How many full professors do we really need? Because they are expensive. And how many, you know, you see it in, I'm so saddened because, you know, when I hear state legislators and, you know, community people say the band program or the orchestra program or the art program or the dance program, I mean, that's just frosting. Let's get down to the cake. You know, let's break this down and let's get back to reading and writing and arithmetic. And the dropout rate in high school is phenomenal. And we now know that, you know, everybody said, oh, that's where we have to have the football program because we can keep those kids in with this football program. Well, the research now shows that we keep them in the school with the arts program longer than we do with the football program. And I don't care that there's 30 kids on the bench, that there's 30 kids. There could be 300 kids in a school if they were all involved in the arts. And I think, I made a joke that I should run for president and I would be the arts candidate, of which our youngest son said, no, don't do that, Mom. But, we have to have people, if our world is going to survive, we have to have people who are out of the box thinkers. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing with Crushing Classical is you're trying to find all those out of the box thinkers.
Exactly.
Who are those artistic people who are saying, not that there's a better way, but there's a different way. I think I've had the privilege of living in 4 different countries over different points of time in my life. And when our kids were younger, we lived in France for a year, which is probably the reason why our oldest son lives in Belgium. And, we also lived in Australia. And I think the greatest gift we gave all 3 of our kids was sending them to school in a foreign country. And what they learned from that was not they had a broadening cultural experience. What they learned was there's more than one right way to do everything. Mm-hmm. That there's not just one right way, that there are many right ways. And what I see Crushing Classical being about is, what are those different right ways? How can we open doors to new right ways? We're only going to have people thinking like that. How can we open doors to new right ways of thinking of highways, or thinking of ecology, or thinking of anything like this? If we don't have people who are willing to get out of the box and think in different ways, we're not going to have a world.
That's so true. It's so true. And so I think the way that you start that is obviously start changing thinking.
Absolutely.
And we touched just a second ago on, that top band gets to wear the black tie.
Exactly. That silk black tie. Ooh, it's so powerful,
So in this world, in this classical world, that silk black tie is a position in an orchestra.
That's right.
And
it's a paycheck.
It's a paycheck. Exactly. And so you had just mentioned a little while ago that one of the things that probably helped your kids, especially Neil, who's a freelancer, is that you were a freelancer.
Exactly.
So talk about that for a second, because, oh man, it's just, I don't know how it gets ingrained in college or before that. Maybe it's because our idols are in these big orchestras or our teachers. And you just think that the only way to succeed is to land one of those jobs, which is like a 1 in 250 chance on that day that you're going to win one. And then if you don't get it, you just feel like such a loser. I know that's how I felt.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think you're a loser now. I have a better point of view about it, but it's heavy.
It is.
And
it's also life defining.
Yes.
I'm a loser. I didn't get that. I'm a loser. As a writer, I get rejected all the time. And I have to say, on occasion, I do go into my room and hide under my desk and lick my loser wounds, and say, that's it, I've had it. No, I think it was very good. I think what I did as a parent, the best thing I modeled as a parent, besides brushing your teeth before you go to bed, and all 3 kids learned how to cook so they can survive or whatever, or they can just enjoy themselves on that level and feed other people, which I think is important, was that they saw what a freelance life looked like, a successful freelance life, and that it was okay. And that actually, even though there were times that rejections were really horrible, and I didn't handle them well, I didn't handle everything well, but they saw that there was a life after rejection. Mm-hmm. That that you just get up, you put your big girl panties on, you get up and you just keep going forward. And you also see that you can survive. And sometimes you win the lottery and sometimes you don't. And boy, those times that you do, it's worth all the time you put into it. And also, our children saw me make a lot of money writing commercial work, writing annual reports and advertising copy and magazine work and this work and that work. And then they also saw me doing this work for money. And then the money came in with this. But then they saw me also writing the short stories,
That is
working on
something.
the novels. And so they saw that. I think I would be absurd to say it was a balance. It wasn't a balance because money is heavier than this book is. And but they saw that it wasn't all unicorns and roses, that it was you have to do this and then you can do that, or you need to make the money and then you also need to dream. And the difference between sometimes you get really lucky and the money and the dream are in the same pocket, but not often.
Right. But tell me this. Did the dream stuff help you to fuel your energy and drive for the money stuff that maybe wasn't so fulfilling, but at least you knew you had this over here that you were working on?
Yes, in a way. And also because I did the other, and that was what fed me. I made a lot of money as a copywriter, and but I made a lot of money as a copywriter because I was first a poet, so I was great at writing headlines. And that ability to pull things succinctly together in 5 words or 6 words and then to write the copy got me jobs. So my dream got me jobs. And nobody said to me, "Oh, you're a wonderful poet. So therefore I'm going to hire you to write copy about my laundromats." It was, do you know what I mean? But they just knew that I wrote good copy. It
People
didn't matter
didn't say,
to them.
right, and people didn't say you write wonderful poetry, so I'm going to hire you to write poetry for me.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. No, nobody ever said that.
Right. So
Never.
that's interesting to see how that feeds into the money making side of things. Because
Right.
I think the problem with the freelance world living is that you're only doing stuff for money and it starts to kill your love for music. I know that happened to me because I was just looking at it as another gig. Okay, how much does that pay? It's a decent per service rate. I'll do it.
Right.
I don't even care what the music is because it pays $1,000.
Sure.
And if you just do that and you don't have any other thing that's feeding you for the love of the reason why you started in the first place, something dies inside of you.
Right. And I think that I always said to our children, everything you do is part of the next thing you're going to do. And every opportunity you have is a chance to build your skills.
I love that.
And I think that that's it. So I think you have to turn the boat around and say, oh, so somebody's going to pay me $1,000 to drive an hour and a half to play this concert there. And what is the music? What am I going to learn in that? I mean, I wrote so many raised hearth fireplaces, pieces of advertising for developers in this area that would make anybody else crazy, but I got really good at it. And there's a value to that. And the other value is, who are you going to meet in that? Who's going to be your stand partner? Who are you going to meet? What connection are you going to make? How big are you going to make your world? And I think that's the other thing about it. The arts give you an opportunity to make a big world.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic, So writers that's a very solitary life, anytime I have a chance to go speak, I never know who's in the audience. I never know who's going to be there. I never know what's going to happen, but I need to go with an open mind that somebody there I'm going to connect with and something interesting is going to happen. And that's going to be worth my hour and a half drive and my 15 minutes change I get from doing it. And that's hard. I mean, I would love to ideally say I do that every time I do something, but that's not true. But I try to do that because that keeps me going, keeps me thinking, well, that's okay. This makes me crazy, but I'm going to go do that and I might meet somebody wonderful. or make a connection or get to think about something. Yesterday I had a very, very long day at work, and I happened to, a magazine came through the mail. It was, I don't need, Raleigh magazine. And I was on the phone doing something, and I just flipped through the magazine, and there was a piece about a young man in the community here whose name is King, who's severely autistic, who was having an art show at the Greg and happened to be a member at the Greg. And I thought, okay, if I get out of my office by 6:30, I'm going to go to this opening. And I did, because I didn't know what I was going to learn there. And it was fascinating to hear this, to meet this young man, to see his work. And I only spent 15, 20 minutes there, but it was, I made my world bigger. My world got bigger because I met this young man who painted, and he had this interesting idea that musicians also have about a sound. He thought that color had an emotional value, just as sound has an emotional value. But he also believed that that color, that emotional value that color had, was a numerical value as well. So all of his paintings would have like yellow and orange and this and that, and there would be big blocks of color. And then he would intuitively understand that that yellow was 17. And he would write 100 times in that yellow space, 17, 17, 17, 17. It's like, what is that color for him, and that emotional basis? And I left that and I thought, wow, my world is just a lot bigger now. When I see a green tree, I'm going to say to myself, what emotional resonance is that? And does it have a number? And why? And just like when you play music, what does that whole note have to it? What's that sound? What is that color that you want to have come out of that whole note? What's that emotional resonance? That got off topic, but anyway, I thought it was fascinating.
It's cool because it opened your mind in a different way.
Right.
Tell me more about your book, because I know that, is the book the play, or you have a play coming out?
Yes.
You have a play coming out.
Right, I have a play.
Yeah.
The book is a collection of 17 short stories. Mm-hmm. And I'm very, very proud of this book because 6 of the short stories in the book have been honored by one of the most prestigious literary journals in the country, called Glimmer Train. And unfortunately, Glimmer Train, after a 30-some-year run, is folding this year. But it has been seen and is probably one of the preeminent short story journals in this country. And to have had 6 stories hit with them is, at one time they called me and said, wow, you're just like, we don't have, this is really amazing that you've done this well with us. So that's nice. And so anyway, there's 6 of the 17 short stories, and some of the other stories have been published. And some of them are absolutely new to this book. But one of the stories in the book is called 6, the number 6. And when I wrote that particular short story, after I finished writing it, I realized that it had the feeling of a monologue. And I had been wanting to try writing a play, and I thought, this is the story. I can move this story from page to stage. And actually, I'll be doing a workshop on May 20th at the Southeast Regional Library in Garner about moving from page to stage. And
had you done that before?
No, I haven't. And I thought, that's going to be easy. And it was a learning curve. It took me quite a while to do it. It took me about 1.5 years to do it. And it's had a round table reading and been tightened up and this and that, whatever. I write a lot of my stories turn on dialogue. I write a lot of dialogue. I started off in 1968 actually writing for WXYZ Radio in Detroit. And I wrote radio commercials for a while, and I think that was my favorite commercial writing job of all time. And if somebody invited me back to write radio commercials, I would do it in a heartbeat. But anyway, I like dialogue. I like how quick it is and the interchange. And I realized, well, here's a story that is, it could be, originally I thought I could see some great actor up there just doing it totally as a monologue. And then I worked with Ian Finley, who's a wonderful playwright in town. And Ian pushed me and pushed me hard over the cliff and said, let's give these other characters voice. Let's let her not tell their story. Let them tell their story. Let's push this. Let's make this a one act. I first wrote it
Neat.
as a 2-act play. And he said, no, let's make it a 1-act. Let's do this with it. And let's, build this and build that. So he really taught me how to build a play. And it was really hard work. That and learning how to do the mechanical part of it, how the dialogue fits on the page and whatever. And so I'm working with the Women's Theater Festival. So I have quite a week coming up where I'll do the From Page to Stage on May 20th, May 22nd. I'll be at Quail Ridge Books with Black Tie Optional doing a book launch. And then on the 26th of May, which is a Sunday, I'm working with the Women's Theater Festival, who are going to be doing a staged reading of the play Six. And it happens to not quite, but get very close to coinciding with my upcoming birthday. I will turn 70, and I thought, I hate parties, and I hate actually being the center of attention. So I thought, this is perfect. I will do this play and this book launch, and I'll sell the play as my birthday party, and I'll buy champagne and cake, and everybody will have champagne and cake at the play reading, and that'll be my birthday party, and it's done. And so I'm over it.
Sounds awesome.
It is. And so I'll be turning 70, and
So can you tell us a little bit about what the play is about?
I can tell you
Without
a little
giving it
bit
away.
without giving it away. The number 6, a couple years ago, I read a lot of nonfiction. My first published book was about Alzheimer's, the last childhood family story of Alzheimer's. And I kind of got on reading lists for medical things. And maybe 5 or 6 years ago, an article came to me about cancer research. And I just, it was one of those moments, how you're scrolling through. And I read this article. And in it, these researchers started talking about that their research was based on major intervention, like chemotherapy and radiation for cancer. How much time does that buy you in reality? And they were talking about, and I don't want anybody to walk away from this podcast or from reading my story thinking, well, I'm not going to take chemotherapy, I'm not going to do the radiation treatment. There's good reason to do it. But these researchers were saying, in extreme cases, when things are, moving quite along, here's the other side. And what they did is they looked at 2 very large populations, those people who took the very life-saving extreme, things, and those who did not. And what was the difference between how long people lived? And they surmised, which I thought was interesting, that people who took these heavy-duty treatments versus those who did not only gained 6 weeks, 6 months, but not 6 years from the 6, and that number really struck with me because it's so immediate. Like, unfortunately, when, people like Greenpeace for many years said in 10 years time and 10 years time and 10 years time, 10 years is like, that's a long way. Or if you say to a young child, your birthday, Christmas will come in 10 months. Well, what does 10 months mean? I mean, 10 months is like too long. And 10 is big, but 6 is immediate. And I thought about that number a lot, and I thought, well, what does 6 mean? And so I began to think about a story. Well, what would this, I don't often think in terms of what would I do, but I think in terms of what would this character do. And I created this character who gets told by her doctor that she has 6. And she says, 6 what? 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 years. And he thinks about it and he says, not 6 years, but 6. And so the story initially starts with the idea of what would you do if you had 6? And a lot of people say, well, I've got this bucket list. And I've sort of kind of thought that the bucket list was dumb. I'm not going to jump. I don't. My bucket list does not include jumping out of an airplane. I've lived all over the world. I've done this. I've had 3 children. Blah blah. What I don't want a bucket list. I would just like to make sure that that I felt at a certain point in my life that I had done what I needed to do to live, to say and to look back. Okay, I did all right. I did all right. So she makes the decision not to do the chemotherapy, not to do the extreme life-saving things, not to extend, being sick those last, or to do a bucket list. But she makes the decision that she's going to, there's a couple things that she has to do to make things right. So she feels good about the decisions she made in her life. And so that's what the play is about.
Does the play show what she does, or?
The play shows what happened to her that changed the course of her life, and then the
Okay.
play shows what she tries to do to make that okay.
That's
And it's
awesome.
hard. It's hard to make it okay.
Yeah, that sounds like heavy.
I mean, I don't think
story.
I could ever make up for the mistakes I made as a parent, and you don't. I mean, I think you just have to get up and you move on. You just move on. And that's what she's trying to do. But she feels like she can't move on until she does these 2 things.
All right, well, and that's being read.
That is being performed
Okay.
in a staged reading. And a staged reading means that the actors will be there and they'll be, reading the parts, but it won't be it's kind of like seeing an opera where not everybody's in, where people aren't in costume.
Okay.
It's like a staged opera also where the singers would stand, and that would be the same way with a staged reading.
Okay.
And this is the Women's Theater Festival, and which has been a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. And I'm very excited about that. And
When's the reading?
is May 26th, which is Sunday, at 3:00 at Burning Coal Theater. And
Great.
I have to thank Burning Coal Theater for allowing us to use the facility, and truly thank Women's Theater Festival for being willing to take on this project and see it as a worthy project to get involved in.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was thinking about musicians, and sort of something you said made me think of this. I've always thought and said several times that one of the things that musicians forget is sort of an untapped place to create is educational shows that are story driven
Right.
for orchestras and performing. I interviewed somebody who created an entire business out of storytelling and playing percussion instruments, and he has children's CDs,
Oh,
and he does
wonderful.
performances.
Yeah.
And the orchestra here has their young performers series, and it's always someone who comes out from outside with a theatrical play, sort of, but there's music to back it up, and it's just you're telling these stories, and I'm thinking, like, I wonder, some of these things would probably be great set to music in a
Oh, that'd be
You know.
wonderful. Yeah.
so I don't know, just my 2 cents about how storytelling circles back into classical
Right.
career choices and things that people could do.
Right. Well, I have one of the novels that I've written and that has been published is called Ashwin's Rug, about 10 people who own the same prayer rug and how it changed their lives. And that book goes over approximately 100 years' time, the lifetime of this rug. And the rug is actually a character. I mean, the rug is the main character because
Yeah.
and the rug causes changes to happen, and magically and not magically. I think the magic is on the human side, in our belief in magic. And I've often thought, oh, wow, that would be such a fun piece to set to music. That would be a really
Absolutely.
fun story to be told both through actors and through music, because it seems to me that the music of the rug changes as it passes through lives.
I know there's composers who listen to this podcast. Maybe that could be a
Maybe they'd be
connection.
interested. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, switching gears quickly, because I did want to touch on one more thing
Sure.
with you, and it's that you created an entire chamber music festival I mean, that's no small feat.
Well, I have to correct that. I didn't create it. I had the wonderful opportunity to do this with my son, Neil. And so together we created
Okay,
it.
right. Um, but when you said it, he was over in Europe,
Yes,
and you created that this would happen
correct.
for how many summers in a row?
5.
5 years in a row.
5 years in a row. So that meant that we had to raise the money, find the venue, build the audience, make the incredible arrangements. The visa arrangement alone was a 2-3 month process
For the chamber orchestra.
for the chamber orchestra. I remember the first year that we did it, and the startling realization that I was going to be buying plane tickets for cellos and basses, along with everything else. It was like all of a sudden there were 3 more orchestra people that I hadn't counted on
Because you have to buy tickets.
Well, at least I didn't have to feed them, but I did have to buy them tickets, And then, the other thing is you do something like that, and the logistics are sort of, both Neil and I were fairly naive when we did it, and you bring 20 people in a chamber orchestra over, you have to house them, you have to feed them. You have to take care of them if they get sick. You have to transport them. You have to find a rehearsal hall, which, by the way, was not easy to do in Raleigh. If somebody built a small rehearsal hall that also had, rehearsal space for quartets and, and this and that, they would make a fortune. I mean, they would absolutely make a fortune.
That's so smart. And when I was in Chicago, there was this old warehouse building that someone rented out, and bands, a lot of bands would go and rehearse because they couldn't rehearse their heavy metal in their apartment, right?
No.
So and I had a friend who had a heavy metal band, but I wanted to practice. She let me go and use her space to practice. So I was in this room with fluorescent orange carpeting and all these punk rock things hanging on the wall. I'm practicing my Bach cello suites and stuff in there. It's funny. But that's a smart idea. So it's hard to find rehearsal space. There's a lot of logistics. In hindsight, would you do that again?
Maybe. I think there were many wonderful things that grew out of that after the first year. One thing I did, which was terrifying to this orchestra, by the way, many of whom did not speak English, so that was also an interesting challenge. But many did speak some English, or they said they spoke English, but that was, it's like me saying that I could fly a plane, I guess. I don't know, but it was complicated. I decided all of a sudden, bang, we were going to run this festival with an orchestra that nobody had ever heard of in the middle of summer, and everybody but you and I own beach homes. So how do you do that?
Yeah.
And I decided, Neil and I together decided we were going to run open rehearsals that were free, that people could come and get a taste, kind of see these. And also, I wanted them to see, and Neil also, we wanted people to see the orchestra as human, like we talked about earlier. Where's the human quality? And so the orchestra was very nervous. Well, what if we get into an argument? And I said, oh my God, please get into an argument. I'll sell tickets.
During rehearsal.
During rehearsal. This is an orchestra that didn't have a, conductor. They just conducted themselves. And I said, you get into my God, if you got into a fist fight and drew blood, I would sell 100 tickets. It'd be great. So, you put that black silk tie on, and you put that tuxedo on, you put that black silk tie on, and that says, behave yourself. Mm-hmm. That says, you're important, you behave yourself, you use the right spoon, whatever. And to see the same people who are going to put on the black tie, who are going to put on the tuxedo, and it's 100 degrees in Raleigh. That also threw them for a loop because they weren't used to that. But you see them in flip-flops and shorts, and you see them eating chocolate because they like chocolate, or you see them, arguing over, should this note be played this way, or did you come in on time, or should that be here, or should this be there? And you get an opportunity to see that humanness of the music and the music makers, that these are just people, these are just people trying to cooperate and coordinate what they're doing.
Yeah.
Then they built their own story. And people could come to the open rehearsals and they could then bring a friend to the actual concert and say, yeah, but, oh, that phrase that you just heard, they worked on that for a half an hour. And that was a revelation for people who are not musicians. Oh my God, you worked on the same phrase for a half an hour? What was that about?
Right.
And to see that same phrase be worked over and over and over, and then to see it in full bloom in a concert is just exciting. And then by the second year, we added a side-by-side program, a training program for young musicians, where they spent not an afternoon, but an entire week in rehearsal, high school students in rehearsal, sitting, being assigned with one player and shadowing that one player and then performing with the orchestra. That was a thrill. I mean, that was just a thrill. And then that meant that I had to sort of commandeer all these high school students. And if you think that was easy, that was complicated. But yeah, it was a lot of work. It was a full-time job. I didn't do much writing those years. But it was
full-time, even though it was 2 weeks, you were working on it all year round.
All year round. It took all year round to raise the money, to get the visas, to interview the students, to get the bios translated from French to English, of the various players, to get the programs made, the posters, to set up interviews, to get publicity lined up, to find the rehearsal hall, to book the concert hall, to feed these people and find a place for them to live. It was a year-long event.
How did you start raising money? Did you just cold call people, or?
Wow, that was hard. Which is another reason to be able to tell stories, because I wrote grants.
Okay.
And,
yes.
I had to be able to tell the story as to why somebody should pay me to bring, or not pay me, I didn't get paid for the 5 years. So, why somebody should pay money, why some arts organization should pay money for a foreign orchestra to come here. Mm-hmm. And it really helped when we switched to the side-by-side program, because then it was like, oh my gosh, well, this is a cultural add-on for these kids.
Yes.
And so, yes, there were cold calls. There were a lot of making connections, a lot of doing presentations, a lot of, going to morning meetings, a lot of just trying to tell the story over and over again and to raise the money. And you have to raise a lot of money to do this. I must have been crazy, But in the meantime, Neil was on the other side of the ocean, convincing these musicians to do this, and getting the bios and getting the visas, and the visa thing. We could do a whole podcast on what it means to bring a foreign orchestra here, what it means to travel to another country, as a musician, to do that. Anyway,
I love it. That's so great. And I have to say, you inspired me because you did that. After I had my daughter and I was feeling really kind of depleted artistically, I said, I have to put on a recital of some kind, chamber music, and just do it. And it was because you built that I sort of had the guts to go and do it on an extremely less scale. Like, I put on 2 concerts,
But still, how...
Yeah, it was a lot of work.
Right.
Just getting the music ready, getting 5 people in the same room to rehearse more than one time. Right. Like, there's so much that goes into that. But then the feeling that when it's done and you're like, I made this happen.
Right. And I think that that's really important to understand, that so you have 3 things. You have a fixed position with an orchestra, and then you jump out of that box and you become a freelancer who does the ballet and a little bit of the orchestra and a little bit of this. And then you have the next big jump, which is, let me create my own thing.
Yeah. So
there's kind of 3 different levels. And in each of them, your parent goes, oh my God, what are they doing now?
Yeah.
Will they starve?
Yep, exactly. And I honestly think that no matter which category you're in, you should have something that you created.
Yes.
Even if you have this big job in an orchestra, because you will get to the point where why can't I have any say in the concert? Why do I have to work 9 services this week? The answer to that is because you have a job, and your job
Right.
is to do what they say. And why doesn't the orchestra market like this or that, or why don't they let me do chamber? All those answers to those questions are because it's your job, and it's your job to do what they say you're supposed to do. So
Right.
if you're not 100% always okay with just doing what they say you're supposed to do, you should create something of your own, even
That's
if
right.
it's tiny, even if it's, I brought my students together into a chamber music concert at the end of the semester or whatever. Like any little thing, I really fully believe that it feeds that work you do for money.
Right.
you
It's like
said
when you get
earlier.
on the plane and they say, and the steward or the stewardess says, okay, here's the safety rules. And, if you're traveling with a child, you should always use the oxygen first. Put your own oxygen mask on before you put your child's oxygen mask on. And I wonder how many people would actually do that. But that's right.
Yeah.
You'd say, well, that's for other people, but I'm going to do my child. But, you need to feed yourself.
Exactly.
You need to feed yourself before you can feed something else.
Thank you, Carrie, for being on the
welcome.
show today. This has been so great. I'm so excited about your play and your books. All those links will be in the show notes
Great.
for that, so people can find it there.
And all of my books are available on Amazon.
Great.
Yep. So anyway, thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and you've been listening to Crushing Classical Podcast. You can follow Crushing Classical on Instagram and Facebook at Crushing Classical. If you haven't yet, you can go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review. Your review helps others to find these conversations. Thank you so much for listening.